I don't know if you've noticed this, but webcams have gotten really good in the past few years. And as somebody who really loves cameras, by and large, I've kind of ignored them. Since I'm fortunate enough to have like my Sony FX3 right here, which has a beautiful full frame sensor, I've just kind of mostly ignored webcams. I had like the Logitech C920 1080p webcam back in the day. I think it was like $100. I have the Insta360 Link webcam, which was the first time I used a webcam that I was like, hey, this is pretty cool, and it can do tracking and everything. Still a very solid choice. And then now I have been tinkering around with this right here, which is the OBSBOT Tiny 2, and obviously it looks pretty darn good. And I do want to let you know that OBSBOT did send the Tiny 2 to me with no obligation or anything. They just asked if I wanted to check it out, maybe offer some feedback to them. I do not have to make a video. I do not have to do anything, say anything, whatever. I've had this camera for several months and I've used it a lot in that time, and I really like it. And it's also my first time using any of the OBSBOT stuff, which I heard good things about, but didn't know anything about since I wasn't really paying attention to webcams. But again, turns out webcams are pretty darn good now. So going over here to the Tiny 2, I'm in the exact same setting as my Sony FX3. So this is a $299 webcam versus my $3,800 Sony FX3 with a Sony Prime lens. This is a $5,000 setup, and this is a $300 setup. This looks better, and it should. I would be so sad if this didn't look better, but the price difference is, you know, it is a little bit absurd. I'm also using the Hollyland Lark M2 since I'm kind of going back and forth. I have my Sennheiser. That's normally what I would use for videos like this, boomed out of frame, but since I'm not just looking at this camera and I'm kind of turning over here and I don't want my voice to change, anyway, I'm pinned a microphone to me just so I can move around a little more, if you're wondering where the audio is coming from. But this is the OBSBOT Tiny 2, which is a 4K webcam, and it can do some pretty cool things. So I kind of just want to, now that I've been able to use it for a while and I've been impressed with it, I just sort of wanted to share some of my thoughts with you, and maybe even how it compares to some other cameras. Like they make a Tiny 2 Lite, and then things like the Insta360 Link that I had from a couple years ago, which I know is a little bit outdated now, but it's still, I think, a pretty solid webcam. So I have my A7S III set up over here so you can see the form factor of the Tiny 2. And it can also do stuff like if I set it to sleep, like most PTZ webcams, it will then face the camera down. You can also disable the microphone. So if you don't want it attached to your computer monitor the whole time, or you're not using it on a laptop. Usually I have this on my desktop computer over here as kind of a webcam for that. So again, you're looking at me on the OBSBOT Tiny 2 in 4K, and this is my MacBook Pro's built-in 1080p webcam, which, at least when I bought this computer, and maybe even still, the best webcam, built-in webcam in an Apple computer. I've used it for video calls and things. It's fine. It's nothing compared to, you know, a mirrorless camera like the FX3, and going back to the OBSBOT, I would much rather use this camera than the built-in camera on the MacBook. So jumping over here, you do have a lot of control options with the OBSBOT Center app. If you want to use it, you absolutely don't have to use the app. As soon as you plug the camera into your computer, it does just become a webcam source that you can choose in anything. But if you want some of these features to apply, then the application works. If you want to dive into some of the tracking, some of the settings, then this is the way to do that. So you got a few things first. Obviously, the thing they're putting first and foremost is tracking. And so there's different tracking modes you can choose if you want upper body, close-up, headless, or lower body. So depending on, you know, how you're using the camera, what kind of stuff you're doing. Motion tracking basically just means the camera's going to be a little more active in how it's tracking you, whereas standard tracking, it's not trying to be like a sports camera or anything like that. And as with many of these cameras, if I hold up my hand, it will turn off tracking. This little light on the camera turns green. That means it's not tracking. If I hold up my hand again, then the light will flash blue, and then it will start tracking me. And it's pretty good at tracking. What I've been using this for is as a second or third camera on live streams. So normally when I'm streaming, I'm over here on this computer, and I kind of have my main camera, but I have this sort of as my webcam because a lot of times during streams, people ask about a piece of equipment or a piece of gear that I need to get up and go grab from somewhere. And so instead of having to leave the frame, I can say like, oh yeah, you know, you asked about whatever, this microphone, let me just get up and go over here and like grab the microphone to show you whatever it is that we're talking about, and I don't have to. It just makes the stream a little more interesting, a little more dynamic, especially as someone who's doing everything on my own, because I can track it like this. Now in standard mode, it does a pretty good job, but if I go really fast, it can lose me. And when it loses me, it turns yellow. So the light Oh, hi, you can see me over here. The light on the camera turns yellow, but it is still looking for me. So as soon as I come back into the frame, then it's gonna pick me up and keep tracking. If I turn on motion tracking, that means it's gonna be a little more aggressive and a little bit faster about how it's tracking me. I can still escape it. Oh my God, actually it's a little harder to escape. Oh gosh, okay. I have a significantly harder time escaping it when it's in motion tracking. So if you're moving around a lot or you want it to track something super active, that's obviously the way to go. Standard tracking, probably what most of us want to use most of the time because it looks a little more natural. And I like this. It's, you know, not unlike the Osmo Pocket 3 where it can be subtle enough that it helps enhance what you're doing and it doesn't become a distraction. And I will say a lot of times auto tracking cameras, this is everything. This one, the InstaLink, even the Osmo Pocket, the auto tracking, for some reason, I feel like they just leave a little too much headroom for my taste. I would like to be framed like a little more kind of like this as it tracks me, but their standard kind of default is to sort of give you a little more headroom than I would usually frame a shot in. You know, like when I'm in charge of no tracking, you know, I like shots sort of framed traditional rule of thirds, and I feel like a lot of these cameras just sort of have a hard time with that. Going back to the controls over here, there are a few different AI modes. These are actually pretty cool. So basically what this means, you have a desk mode, a whiteboard mode, a hand tracking mode, and a group mode. So depending on how you're using the camera, you know, like a lot of people use these for work calls, for teaching, for, you know, as students, whatever. You can kind of have the camera work for you in different ways, which is pretty cool. I actually really like desk mode. So right now my camera is just on my MacBook Pro's, you know, monitor here. So desk mode, what desk mode will do is it's going to try and create a top-down shot. Now right now you can see the camera is just mounted on my MacBook's monitor and it's slightly tilted down as far as it can go. So this looks very weird, but I guess if I had something to show you, I still could. It is flipping the image. But what's cool is the stand lets me just flip the camera up like this. Could even get maybe a little more reach. And now I've actually got a fairly decent top-down shot, even just from my MacBook. So normally this would kind of be a little bit higher up, right? If you had this mounted on a regular computer monitor that's a little bit taller, or your laptop was even maybe on a laptop stand, you can actually get a pretty decent top-down shot. But even from, you know, say I was in a pinch, even from just my 14-inch MacBook's screen, I can still get a top-down shot to show you, you know, whatever I needed to show you. And I should actually talk about this stand because it is kind of a cool little magnetic stand right here. It's very simple, which is nice. The bottom of the camera does have a 1/4-20 mount, so if you just want to put this on a regular tripod or some other stand, you can do that. And then this little folding stand has some versatility to it. The whole bottom of the camera is a magnet, so this is magnetic, and then you can pop it on your computer or whatever whatever you're using. And then this does give you a few more positioning options with the camera. I will say the bottom of the camera right now, very warm, like really warm. I've never had the camera overheat and shut off, but like I wouldn't want to keep my hand on this for too long because it's very, very warm. So just be aware, there's a lot of processing going on in there. It does tend to heat up. And again, I've never had that cause like performance issues with the camera, but it's something to just be aware of. If you grab the camera, it's been on for a long time, it's gonna be really warm. Going back to our control options, you do have presets. So if you wanna put the camera in certain positions or certain framings, you can create presets right here and easily switch between those, which is nice. And then you do have gimbal controls. You can choose coarse or fine. Even coarse, a lot of times using these types of cameras digitally, I have found moving them to be a little bit difficult to make it, to get it framed exactly where I want it. Whereas this one, even just with the little virtual thing here, works really well and is pretty smooth if I need to make adjustments on the fly. But if I change this to fine, then those movements are even smaller. So if I just want to do a little bit of fine tuning without being too distracting, I can do that right there, which is really cool. It works great. It can also zoom in if I want to zoom in, but that's not really something I want to do too much of right now. So we're going to zoom. We're gonna zoom way back out over here. We do also have some image options. So I can go up here. There is image style standard and streaming. For some reason, streaming just makes it look like this. Don't know why. There is an HDR mode. So right now there's a lot of contrast in my shot. If I turn on HDR, you'll kind of see it's just a little bit less contrast. Up to you, personal preference. I leave that off. There is autofocus. The autofocus works quite well. So here's my hand, and if I move that, now it's gonna lock on my face, and there we go. And this does have a 1/1/2 inch sensor, which is not a 1-inch sensor, it's smaller than that, but it is significantly larger than most standard webcams, including the Tiny 2 Lite or the InstaLink that I have. the original Instalink that I have. So that larger sensor does me better image quality, better low light performance, and slight. It's never going to look like background blur like this, a full frame camera with a with a prime lens. But you know, you can focus on the subject, and the background can be slightly out of blur sometimes without having to do any, you know, AI background stuff, which is, I don't know, it's kind of nice. We've also got auto exposure, which is great. Again, talking about that low light performance. Right now I have manual exposure because I'm using controlled lights, and I want to try to match my cameras as much as I can. But let me turn off some lights in here. If I turn off my main light, turn off hair light here, it's not pitch black in here, but it's, you know, it's pretty dark. You can kind of see the way this camera looks is probably pretty accurate to how it looks in person. I'm going to turn on auto exposure. And now this is how the OBSBOT is handling these exact same lighting conditions, which it looks way more usable. It looks way brighter on here than it does in person. It's still clear. You kind of notice though, if I move, there's a little bit of blur, a little bit of smear because we're in this super low light condition. I have no idea what it's, you know, what it's trying to do to make that happen. But this is, again, very usable, especially for things like work calls, school calls, things like that. I probably wouldn't want to record a whole YouTube video this way. If I were doing a live stream, especially maybe something like a gaming stream where it's super dark and I'm kind of smaller in the corner like this, then I think it does become a lot more usable. And again, this is much more what it looks like in person in here. And this is, you know, the auto exposure's brightness. Not that you have to use auto exposure to do this. You also have an anti-flicker option. So depending on where you're at in the world and what kind of lights you're using, if you're noticing that there are, you know, flickers happening behind you, you can play with these to see if that will help reduce the flicker. And as I said, we do have some auto white balance options. I don't have that turned on because I know what white balance I want in here. And we do have some image adjustments as well. So if you want to change, you know, your contrast up a little bit or your saturation or any of these things, you can kind of fine tune the way their image looks here. I don't have any of these changed right now. This is just the image straight out of the camera. I am also running this through Ecamm Live, which I could use Ecamm's image adjustments to sort of change this a little bit, but for the sake of the video, I wanted you to just see what the camera looks like on its own, which is this right here. It's kind of cool that it has this because if you're not using something like Ecamm or you're not using OBS, but you want to adjust the image, the way the image looks, either for preference or to match something else, you can just do it straight through here. And there is a virtual camera option. So like I said, this is plug and play as soon as you connect it. And this is also one of the few webcams that works with the Rodecaster video. So the UVC compatibility, awesome. But if you want to use it as a virtual camera, then all of these different image settings and things will very easily translate over to whatever other application you want to use. And we've got some more options here. So we do have the initial state that it wakes up in, so you can choose what the framing looks like. Why did I change my framing? You can choose what the framing looks like when the camera first wakes up, which is pretty cool. Go back to where it was there. We can choose how we want it to go to sleep. Do we want to go to sleep after a certain amount of time? Do we want a different background? This is basically what it would output when it's asleep. So if this is something like going into Ecamm Live with a bunch of other cameras and this camera goes to sleep, I will see an image that says going to sleep, or it will just put something up on stream or whatever it might be. There is gesture control. So the most standard one is I hold up my hand and then it starts tracking me, and now it's tracking me. The light on here turned blue, and if I hold up my hand again, it will then take a second and flash, and now it turns green, meaning it's not tracking me. I can get out of the frame. That's kind of the most standard one. It does have a few other options, including zoom, so you can, you know, L in the shape of the forehead, zoom in and out. I have those turned off. Not because they don't work, but because maybe they work a little too well. I use this camera a lot, like I've said, as a second or third camera on live streams. And I think because it ends up with this view a lot, and I'm someone who talks with my hands a lot, I accidentally trigger the gestures often. And so during live streams, what will happen is I'll be talking and then I'll switch to this camera and it's just like crazy zoomed in because at some point it has picked up a hand gesture. I've noticed when I'm using the camera directly, it's way more specific about picking up gestures. So that's good. When you're kind of facing something else or you're not looking directly at this camera, it seems like it accidentally picks up gestures more often, which may or may not be a problem for you. It kind of depends if you're someone who flails your arms around a lot when you talk like I do. It's just how I am. There's nothing I can do about it. So I have turned the zoom controls off and I have the regular standard tracking, which usually works pretty well. But even if you wanted to try other things besides any of that, you can do voice control, which I have turned off, but if I turn some of these on, like those ones right there, with voice control, so like right now, if I were to say sleep tiny, it should go to sleep. But if you notice, it did not go to sleep. And the reason for that is because it's not very good at parsing out those phrases in sentences. So, you know, even though the sleep tiny command is activated, it's not going to sleep. But if I pause and have a little break before I say the command, sleep tiny, then the camera goes to sleep. And now I do have the option of what I want the mic to be doing when the camera's asleep. Typically, you'll probably want the mic to be off when the camera's asleep, but you can have it listen, so then I can say, hi, Tiny, and then it woke up. It actually did a pretty good job of picking me up in between my sentence right there. Generally, I've turned these off just because I don't know how to naturally say that stuff during, like, I don't know. I've turned those off. I do think they are cool options, especially just for accessibility. Just, you know, if someone's not able to make gestures, you can use your voice. If you're not able to use your voice, you can do gestures. If you're not able to do any of that or you don't want to, you can just choose things manually. So I like that just for versatility and accessibility. You had been listening to me on the Hollyland Lark pretty much this whole time. Now you're listening to me on the Tiny 2's built-in microphone. It's a webcam microphone. Like, this is definitely more of a camera than it is a microphone. There is some noise reduction. I can turn that strong, and now you're hearing strong noise reduction. Not that there's any noise in here, but you can see how it's trying to isolate my voice more. Or you can just turn on weak. You can disable the microphone if you want. You can change, you know, how far you are from the microphone. If you're going so far as to connect an external camera, a webcam to your computer, I feel like also go a little bit further and connect an external microphone. In fact, I would say get the microphone before the camera. So even if you're just using the MacBook's microphone or the MacBook's camera, which doesn't look the best, but now I'm using a microphone that sounds better. I did a whole video about audio is half a video and focus on audio first, because good audio can actually make poor video look better. It's a strange psychological thing, but it is totally true. So if I go back over here and I'm using this microphone, the wireless microphone with the OBSBOT, it looks quite a bit better than if I'm just using the built-in microphone from the OBSBOT, which is fine. Totally fine, totally usable, especially if you're just doing, you know, a work call or whatever. But if you're doing something where you want to level things up, then using an external microphone, whether it's a wireless one like this or just a regular USB microphone connected to your computer, or something crazy fancy like the Rodecaster Pro and SM7B and all that kind of stuff. However you want to approach it, that's definitely something I would recommend. There are also a few other settings like remote control and just sort of some other like hotkey settings and stuff. There is a beauty setting. So right now, believe it or not, this is just my natural look. But if I turn on the beauty setting, I think slowly you'll notice I suddenly start to have smoother skin and a nicer complexion. So if you find the digital look too sharp, or you just want to look as good as possible, it does give you some options here to play with here. Blur level, I'm gonna crank that sucker up right there. I need all the help I can get. Let's do the man filter. It'd be funny if it just made me look like an entirely different person. If you really want to get into the beauty controls, you can actually go in and sort of try to change a little bit of everything. And then this is also where you can go down, you can change things like the status light if you want it to be on or off, and the brightness of the light. You can adjust the firmware right here, which is really cool. OBSBOT is pretty great about updating firmware to, you know, add new features, fix bugs, address compatibility, all that kind of stuff. And I did mention this is one of the few cameras that actually does work, few webcams that works with the Rodecaster video. That has kind of been my litmus test for actual UVC webcams, because other cameras that advertise compatibility with the Rodecaster video don't always have compatibility with it, and this one actually does work with it, which is very cool. So, you know, that's a pretty niche case if you have a Rodecaster video and you want to use a webcam with it via USB, but you can use the Tiny 2 with it. Now, as I mentioned, the Tiny 2 has a $299 MSRP, which is not the tiniest price, but what you're essentially paying for is that bigger sensor, the higher quality sensor, which does help, like I mentioned, with low light performance, focus, overall image quality, that kind of stuff. There is the Tiny 2 Lite, and then there are other cameras like my original Insta360 Link, which have smaller sensors, and they go for about half the price. Like the Tiny 2 Lite is $160. It's about the same price as this. They have a lot of the same functionality in terms of following you, but it's just it's a much smaller sensor. So let's do a quick comparison, actually, since I have my Insta camera here. So now what I've done, because I'm using Ecamm, I was actually able to put this together very, very quickly, which is nice, is I've done a side-by-side comparison of all three cameras. So the one on the, I'll put labels on these. The one on the left of the screen is the MacBook Pro's built-in 1080 webcam. The one in the middle is the OBSBOT Tiny 2, and the one on the right is the InstaLink 360. So the first thing you'll notice right away is the difference between 4K and 1080. So the two on the right are both in 4K. If you look at the clarity, especially hair, I was strategic. I didn't shave, so you could have all these little details. It definitely wasn't because I was lazy. You have all these details to kind of, see how they blur or don't blur together over here. So 1080 versus 4K, you can get really good looking 1080 video. If I plug my Sony FX3 or my Canon EOS R into the Rodecaster Video or an A10 Mini, which is, those are 1080 switches, I can get really good looking 1080. The MacBook Pro's 1080 webcam is not great 1080, right? So you can kind of see the difference once you start adding in a dedicated camera. The quality really does level up a lot. So it's nice to be able to show that there. Now the difference between the InstaLink and the OBSBOT, I did actually, if I reset the Insta, this is what it looks like by default. I did try to do a few things like change the color temperature a little bit and play with the tint a little to try to bring it in line with the OBSBOT for maybe a little bit more of a direct comparison, just so that way you can kind of see how they resolve colors. There's no processing done on the OBSBOT. This is just the natural image straight out of the camera. So what I can say there is that I personally do prefer the image of the OBSBOT over the Insta. Granted, not necessarily a super fair comparison because the Insta is several years old and it's half the price. It's just the one that I happen to have. So I think here's sort of the thing to look at. If you're using the built-in camera, the built-in MacBook camera, the built-in computer camera, and all you need is just your image, you just need someone to be able to see you, then it's fine, right? Like, you don't need to spend extra money on a webcam, especially if it's just like a quick work thing or a school thing, maybe you don't really care. If you want things to look better, you want to level things up, or you're just someone like me who's into this stuff and it's just fun for you, but you don't necessarily want to go the full route of a dedicated, like, separate camera and all the capture cards and expenses and everything that go into getting an image like this, then that does make sense where a webcam, especially a modern webcam that looks really good, could come into play and be incredibly helpful. Or even if you're like me and you have a camera like this, but you want something that's a little simpler sometimes, or to use as a second or third angle for videos or live streams or whatever, then adding a webcam to your setup could be pretty cool now that they're capable and they look really decent. So with that being said, if you have something like the InstaLink, I know this is a few years old, I feel like maybe the image quality is not quite on par with the OBSBOT, but do you want to spend an extra $300 just to make that leap? I don't know. I think there's some diminishing returns right there. I have been happy with the InstaLink since I've had it. That's been the only webcam that I've had for the past couple of years, and I've used it a lot and it works great. I'm bummed that it does not work with the Rodecaster Video. The $299 for the OBSBOT I think is awesome, just with the functionality, the features, and the greater device compatibility. So if I only had the Insta, you already have a decent 4K webcam, you probably don't need to upgrade or anything. But if you don't have anything, you're just using the built-in camera, or you don't even have that, and you want to do something, but you don't want to make the leap to mirrorless, then personally, I would jump straight to the Tiny 2 because you get a lot for the price, that larger sensor, the greater compatibility. I think all of those things are really worth it. And speaking of compatibility, thank you to everyone who felt compatible enough with me to support the channel through YouTube channel memberships. And if you want to know a little bit more about leveling up the quality of your audio and video in your videos, then check out these videos right here. That made a lot more sense in my brain before I said it out loud.